Hello again, all. I thought that since I'd done a review of Hammer's Taste the Blood of Dracula, I'd do one of the follow-up, which some people don't like, but I do. It's Dracula AD 1972, which is the first of the series that's set in the modern era. And some people objected to that, although it starts off in 1872, where a scene where Dracula, played, of course, by Christopher Lee, and Van Helsing, played by Peter Cushing, are having a battle on top of a runaway coach, and Van Helsing pushes Dracula off the top of the coach. They're wrestling around on the ground. The coach is wrecked, and ultimately Van Helsing gets the better of Dracula, stabs him through the heart with the spoke wheel of one of the wheels on the carriage, and kills him. And he dies in the church, but he also kills Van Helsing. I think he strangles him to death in the churchyard of a church called St. Barthold's. And then it jumps to the modern age, and they do the titles. And it was directed by Alan Gibson, written by Don Houghton, and is, like I said, produced by Hammer Films. The other principal stars are Christopher Neame as a character named Johnny Alucard, which, for those who haven't figured out, is Dracula spelled backwards. Marsha Hunt as Gaynor, Caroline Munro as Laura, Janet Keyes as Anna, Michael Kitchen as a guy named Bill, the beautiful Stephanie Beacham as Jessica Van Helsing, who's the daughter of Lorimer Van Helsing, is the descendant of Lawrence Van Helsing, who we saw in the initial scene. Michael Coles as Joe, the band Stoneground, who performed their two big hits, You Better Come Through and Alligator Man, at the party that opens the movie. And William Ellis as Joe, who's Stephanie Beacham's boyfriend. And it takes place against the backdrop of the hippie culture. Starts out with a party and everybody's rocking, and they're listening to Stoneground, and the party gets out of hand and the cops show up and roust everybody. The principal character at the party is this character, Johnny Alucard, played by Christopher Neame, and he is sort of the leader of this band of 5 or 6 different characters, and they later meet in a club, and they're just kind of hanging out, and he asks them something about, would they be willing to participate in a black mass, and they're all going, oh, come on, stop putting us on. He says, well, I'm not putting you on. There's a deep sanctified church, and we can have it at midnight, and it'll be a blast. Come on, what do you got to lose? It's all make-believe anyway. And they reluctantly agree, particularly Stephanie Beacham doesn't really want to go, but she's kind of prowling around in her grandfather's library looking at books on black mass. He says, what are you looking at that for? That's not to be fooled around with. And she says, oh, we're just kind of goofing around. And he says, oh, you're hanging out around with your group, aren't you? Groupies. And she says, they're not groupies, they're just a bunch of friends, and it's just all for laughs. He says, well, some things aren't for laughs, and he puts the book back, and is warning her against playing around with things that she shouldn't mess around with. And they go ahead and hold the black mass, and during this is interesting. They have a satanic altar, and Johnny Alucard is playing this weird music, and one of the things that kind of dates the film is some of the language. He says, dig the music, kids, while they're listening to this haunting music. And he's invoking all these names of actual demons, Belphegor, and Astaroth, and Asmodeus, and Beelzebub, and of course Dracula. And this weird sort of ritual takes place, and Laura wants to participate in it, and she's lying on the altar with this cauldron, cup, rather, that's kind of like a grail cup, and blood starts pouring out of it onto her rather ample chest, which is a very sexy scene. And Count Dracula actually appears, and Alucard wanted to sacrifice Jessica Van Helsing, since she's Van Helsing's great-great-granddaughter, and was one of the people who destroyed Dracula in 1872, but Laura insists that she be the one who, be chosen. And in what I thought was rather a waste and just bad plotting, they have Dracula kill her. They should have had him transfer her into a vampire, because she would have been like the sexiest vampire ever. But instead he kills her, and then they all leave, and they think it's all fake. And Johnny the next day convinces them fake, even though it's a fake. And later on, you see a couple of kids playing around in this churchyard of the now desanctified St. Barthol's Church, and they find Laura's body completely drained of blood. Now an investigator who is an inspector played by Michael Coles comes in, and there have been several of these bodies found drained of blood, and he's trying to figure out what's going on. Because he thinks that there's might be some sort of a cult involved, he goes to see Van Helsing and tells him about the particulars of the murders, and he starts becoming convinced that maybe there's a connection with vampirism and with Count Dracula. Meanwhile, Johnny Alucard has seduced Gaynor, who is played by Marsha Hunt, and he gives her to Dracula to feast on, as it were, and she's killed. And then he begs Dracula to turn him into a vampire. And at first he's kind of resistant. He's like, you're not really worthy of me, and he doesn't do it. But finally he convinces him that he could be more use if he's quote unquote given the power. And so Dracula converts him into a vampire, biting him in the neck. And then he immediately goes out and he seduces like a girl he meets in a laundromat, and he sacrifices her, drinks her blood, and now she's another victim for this inspector to investigate. He lures Joe, played by William Ellis, back to the club, which has now been closed. It's called the Cavern, which I thought was interesting because, of course, that's a reference to the club where the Beatles first performed. It's called the Cavern. But, of course, cavern being like a dark cave, and that's where they hang out, and that's where a vampire would hang out. He seduces Joe and drinks his blood. There's kind of a little bit of a hint of homosexuality in there, though it's not really blatant. Then later on, it turns out that Joe dies because he was trying to get back to his grave and he didn't make it in time. The sunlight destroyed him. Van Helsing now is convinced that Dracula has returned. He's seeking after Johnny Alucard. He figures out that his name is Dracula spelled backwards, so he must be a servant of Dracula. Goes to his apartment, confronts him, holds up a crucifix, and he's screaming, and he falls backward into a bath of running water. That's one of the things that can kill a vampire, running water. So he's destroyed by his own shower, basically. And it's kind of an ironic end. Surviving Dracula hypnotizes Stephanie Beacham, and he's gonna sacrifice him, and is trying to lure Van Helsing into this church, St. Barthol's. Van Helsing, during the day, sets up a trap. He sets up a floor full of spikes, a pit full of spikes outside the church, and puts a crucifix on the altar, gets rid of all the satanic stuff, and places holy water and crucifixes around the church. So now he's kind of re-sanctifying it. And when Dracula returns, his coffin is obviously now held in the church. At night, he is sort of pursuing him, even though he has hypnotized Stephanie Beacham. He has not yet converted her into a vampire, though he plans to. And Van Helsing traps him, forces him into the out of the church and into the pit full of spikes, which he falls on, but he's not completely destroyed. And he takes a shovel and pushes him further onto which I thought was particularly gory, onto the spikes, and they pierce his chest, and he dies and turns into just a big pile of sand. And again, you see the skeleton deteriorate, and some fairly decent special effects. Now Stephanie Beacham is released from the curse, and she collapses into her grandfather's arms. That's the end of that particular movie. I thought it was particularly well done. The music by the Stoneground is really good. Like I said, they performed their two big hits, You Better Come Through and Alligator Man, which is their number one hit. I think it actually went to number one, at least in the UK. I'm not sure how high it scored in the US, although they were, I believe, a San Francisco band. And I don't think that putting it in the modern setting subtracted from anything. I think it's still a good, tense story. The script is well written. There are some superfluous elements, and it comes off as a little bit dated because of the hippie culture that was portrayed in the movie, but I don't really think that detracts from the enjoyment of the movie. I find it quite enjoyable, as I did the follow-up, the final Christopher Lee Dracula movie, Satanic Rites of Dracula, which I'll discuss later.